Welcome. I can't begin to tell you how excited I am to be working with all of you and to be back at Seattle University. Some of you may know, if you saw my CV, that I spent 2 wonderful years at Seattle U from 2014 to 16 as the Gleed Distinguished Chair of Business. And it's been my sincerest wish to get back to Seattle U. It's just a great place with a huge heart for the students, for the community, part of the Jesuit tradition. So I couldn't be happier. And this class is one that is right in my sweet spot, something that I have been teaching for decades. I won't say how many, but it is something that is near and dear to my heart, and something that through the many people that I have touched through my career all over the world, I'd like to think that I have had a positive impact and enabled people to be more effective in their negotiations and persuasion attempts. So stay with me. I wanted to not only share what to expect from the class, but also a little bit about the philosophy, the way in which we are going to engage together in this class. So in these slides, I have two basic goals here. One is to give you, again, a sense of what to expect. What are my expectations of you? What are your expectations of each other in such a class like this? But then I want to spend a little bit of time framing this idea of negotiating, not just at the level of negotiating contracts for your company or negotiating your next job, but taking a step or two behind that and really addressing some of what I have been finding in executives and managers I've worked with, which is this idea that they're not even identifying and engaging in opportunities that may have presented themselves, and either it was through fear or just a lack of recognition that this opportunity was one that they could have made a difference for themselves or for others. And so that's why I want to kind of walk through those slides. You'll see that it also tracks well with the HBR piece that I made available for you. So let me set the stage a little bit. In this class, as you would expect, I'm not coming in it with a feeling of this is negotiation 101. Of course not. You all are probably pretty adept and pretty experienced. That's the good news. It's also the bad news. In the same way that we all have smartphones, therefore we're photographers, because we negotiate all the time, I think many of us think that we're all good negotiators. We remember the ones that we did really well, or maybe the ones that were particularly memorable, negotiating in a flea market, perhaps in some small corner of the world. But how we remember what we've done doesn't necessarily equate with what principles, concepts, evidence-based research that will enable us to not only negotiate successfully, effectively, but to do so in almost any setting, with almost any person or other parties who are present. So I really want to kind of break down this idea of negotiation into some of its more important component parts, because we have, whether you like it or not, these patterns or habits. Some we recognize, some we don't. And those habits may repeat themselves. They may have started, in fact, from some of our earliest memories of others, perhaps parents and others senior to us negotiating. These habits may or may not have served you well. And again, we'll kind of take a closer look at it. We also have biases and beliefs about what is negotiable and where I could have impact, and whether I'm even willing to take the risk for fear that someone might brand me aggressive, or overbearing, or there's another word and I'll refrain at the moment. So I want us to recognize that just because we all negotiate and perhaps have had some, if not a lot of success, there's still room for learning. There's still an opportunity to see and understand when you've been successful, why you've been successful, and when you could have been more successful, what might drive that. So as you'd expect, in the same way that you don't learn how to ski by reading a book, you don't learn how to be a great negotiator by reading a book, even though there are some great books out there. And so the nature of the course, whether we are in person or working asynchronously or working in our discussion groups, it's going to be very much experiential. Learning with others, learning from others. Yes, I'm the professor, but I'm 1 and you're 20. So I expect to learn as much from you as you will learn from me. Now, how we learn is another story. And I mentioned this briefly in the first bullet, that in order for you to allow for the possibility that there are some tactics and strategies and concepts that undergird negotiation and persuasion in a number of contexts and settings that could engage your ability to grow and to be an even better negotiator, we have to start by recognizing that that which we have done and have always done is our comfort zone. So while this is a required course, you can get through it, probably get a decent grade, check that box. If you stay in your comfort zone, if you do what you've always done, listen to the conversations, read the assignments, and just keep doing what you've always done, there won't be much learning. And I say that because in order to truly learn, it requires us to reject in some way what we, quote, already know. And this is uncomfortable, particularly when you have achieved the successes that you have in your career. So I'm not asking you to abandon everything you know and everything you've done, but I am asking you, because this is this natural, habitual thing that we do all the time, negotiation, I want you to think hard about moving beyond your comfort zone, moving into a space that maybe feels unusual or involves steps that you wouldn't ordinarily take, and allow for the possibility that that could make you a better negotiator. It's almost like taking one step back to take 2 steps forward. And part of that is this ability to be humble and vulnerable and experiment. Try what we're talking about. Practice things that maybe you haven't done before or in the way that we do them. And additionally, reflect on that process. In the same way in your organizations, you would do an after-action review after a program, not just a successful program, not just an unsuccessful program, but a successful one as well. This reflection is key to learning, because it's not just, yay, I did well, or yay, I got what I wanted, but rather, why? What about the way I negotiated is repeatable, sustainable? And not only what about the way I negotiated got me the outcome I wanted, but how did it affect the relationship with the other person or persons with whom you're negotiating? So reflection, as you'll see, is a key part of learning and improving as well. And as you may have noticed in the opening place that I put in our Canvas, I'd like to know your interests. Yes, I've developed the course, but there's also a little bit of room to put in the kinds of negotiations that you would find personally meaningful to you, whether those are negotiations involving gender differences or union negotiations or other particular issues that are of interest. So family business, for example. So do let me know sooner rather than later what those interests may be, and if there is some additional support from others that this is of interest, I will try to design that into some of the space that we have within which to work. Okay, in order to set the stage, as I said, I want to take a step back, and I want you to honestly look at scenarios like this and imagine that you found yourself in this scenario. And the reason I ask you to do this, I'll elaborate on further, is, again, this gets to those underlying habits and patterns of behavior, some of which we're aware of and some that we're not. And it's not bad or good, so please, you might just keep track of your answers to each of these scenarios on a scrap piece of paper. You're not turning it in, it's not being graded, but I do want you to be honest about what is the likely response that you would have to a situation like this, and we will, throughout the course, begin to unpack that as to why, and are there better ways, and if so, what are they and why are they potentially better, or at least more likely to enable you to be even stronger, even more confident negotiators. So here's the first example. Imagine you walk in to the Lowe's or the Home Depot by you, and you notice the refrigerator you're about to buy goes on sale tomorrow. But it's not convenient for you to come back tomorrow. In fact, it's not convenient for you to come back for the entire time that this sale price is good. What do? If you want to think for a moment and pause the recording, feel free. I'm going to go to the next one. You get your monthly cable bill, and if you're like me, these are all online and available if you look for them, and you find out that this month, or perhaps even a few months ago, your rate went up, unbeknownst to you, 15%. And you're a little quizzical about this rate hike because not only do you not recall hearing about it, but you also notice that new customers are being offered a much better rate and perhaps even a higher speed. What would you do? Again, there's no right answer, but I'd like you to jot down what it is you'd likely do in a situation like this. I have three more. Imagine you've just started a new job about a month ago, and you want to take a couple of days off. You haven't earned or accrued any vacation time yet. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, it's not just I need a break, but a friend of yours has decided to take that long-awaited wedding that pandemic had kind of paused it. And so it's a lovely vacation site, and it really would benefit you to not just go for the weekend, but take a couple of days before and after the weekend. What would you do? Would you take it? Would you make up an excuse? I hope we're not talking about lying here. We'll get more into that. But again, be honest. What would you do in a situation like this? Here's a totally new idea, maybe. You've noticed that for the last several years, your neighbor's fruit tree, whose branches, some of them, feed over into your yard, drop fruit. And while it's lovely to get this free fruit, if you're not on top of it, the fruit that falls makes a mess, starts to rot, and occasionally attracts rats and other critters. What, if anything, would you do in this situation? And finally, back in the workplace, imagine that you were part of or even led a team that through your efforts implemented an improvement or a more efficient kind of process that in the first year alone saved the company $500,000. And you're thinking, wow, this is a big deal. How do we incentivize this team and future teams to do things like this? Is there a way that we could benefit from some small percent of the overall savings. What would you do? Now, while you're thinking about how you'd respond to these examples, I imagine that some of you were simultaneously evaluating these three questions. One is whether or not you think you could influence the outcome, the desired outcome of these 5 situations. Maybe some of you were also thinking about, well, while it would be nice to influence the outcome, the stress of doing this, I just as soon step away and avoid doing this. And maybe for some of you, you're also thinking, or in addition, thinking about, okay, I'd like to have this outcome. It's moderately stressful, but I'm willing to do it because I think my chances of success are high enough and I'm likely to engage in this negotiation. So again, these are just some ideas for you to think on, because we're going to get into them in greater detail. I'm going to come back to these 5 examples in just a moment. But first, I want to kind of set it up in terms of where we're going in this course. So again, I'm assuming that you've all negotiated. Maybe some of you have taken 1 or more negotiation classes or workshops in your career. So I don't want to state the obvious, but I will for the moment, and that is negotiation is a bargaining process, right? Goods and services, payment, trade, some sort of arrangement where 2 or more parties bargain to get to a point of agreement. And it's also important to suggest that this process, and one reason why some people find it stressful or they fear engaging in these conversations is because naturally, if a person is offering $100 for a used bike that the seller is asking $200 for, you can see that the interests are opposed, right? There's a $100 gap in between the seller's desired price and the buyer's willingness to pay. But there are shared interests in that example as well, right? They both have some interest in the bike, whether it's having it or getting rid of it. But the process of negotiation is where we use our tools of communication and persuasion and logic to be able to find that sweet spot of overlapping interests so that both parties can feel pretty good about the outcome. Now, here's something you may not have heard before, and I'm going to try to make the point as clearly as I can. What else do we know about negotiation? It's voluntary. What do I mean by that? Well, imagine one of your coworkers, let's call him Bob, comes up to you out of nowhere and says, Janie, we need to talk. That proposal you sent to our client contains some errors, and now you have set us up for failure. We're not going to be able to meet these needs. We need to talk about this. We need to negotiate. You have the right, if you're Janie, to say something to Bob like, you're absolutely right, Bob. We do need to talk about this. What does Thursday at 4 look like in your calendar? And some of you, I hope, are smiling. Really? You can do that? Absolutely. And the reason I say this is because we often get sucked into negotiation processes that we weren't expecting, that we are not ready for. And if we're not ready, if we're not prepared, both mentally, as far as what are the important and relevant information, what data do I need to collect, etc., but also psychologically, when someone comes at you unexpectedly, you're not in the best place to respond. Your emotions kick up. And when your emotions kicked up and your amygdala is engaged, your ability to kind of, fight fire with fire is severely constrained. And we'll talk more about that in class. But again, let me underscore, negotiation's voluntary. And to the degree that you recognize this and allow yourself every opportunity to be prepared for negotiations, this is going to make a huge difference in your ability to be successful. So what does it mean to be a successful or effective negotiator? Well, the standard ideas that most of us think of are these, right? Getting better returns, salary, benefits, profits, etc. for yourself and for others. In fact, that's true, but when you factor in these other issues, how we feel about conflict, what happens when we are attacked or we feel attacked, when you know you have these skills, it gives you a real sense of agency and ability to negotiate on your terms, the ability to feel liberated from other people's expectations or constraints, that you're not playing their game, but you're playing within your expertise, you're playing your game. And because of this, this knowledge gives you a sense of calm, that you know that conflicts, which many people are uncomfortable with, not only psychologically, but our bodies physiologically react when we're feeling a conflict state. Having that sense of comfort and calm is hugely important, not only to your ability to negotiate, but also to being seen as a credible negotiator. And finally, success breeds success. So having this ability enables you to not only confidently respond to planned and unplanned negotiations, but it adds to your belief of being able to perform in not only the one setting that just occurred, but also other settings that were to arise. So having the belief in your ability to do well in a situation like this is critical. All right, so let's go back to those 5 examples I gave you a moment ago. And you might recall, the fruit tree or the vacation time, etc. Why do I ask about these? Maybe some of these seem pretty trivial, pretty low stakes, and they are, most of them. What happens when you find yourself with these everyday, low stakes, low risk negotiation opportunities? Do you take them? And if you don't take them, why don't you take them? And I say this because, yes, we all have our reasons for engaging in these negotiations or not. And remember what I said about conflict. But if we choose not to engage in these simple things, and perhaps our reasons are clear to us. We don't have the time, we don't have the energy, it's not that big of a deal, or the amount of effort I'd have to put in versus the benefit I could accrue is not worth it. And all of this may be legitimate. But if you find that you are not engaging in these everyday opportunities to negotiate, what impact does not engaging have on you? And when I say have on you, you'll see in a moment, I don't just mean on your pocketbook. There's quite a bit more. And what impact do these choices have on people whom you represent or for whom you could advocate? So let's go a little further. I've been teaching negotiation for decades, as I've said, and I have written extensively on this, taught all over the world. And you might think that there are some significant cultural differences, and there are, but there are some things that I've found are really quite similar. And one of them is this idea that people all over the world either don't engage, don't think it's worth the effort, or are fearful for doing so. And so I started thinking about this and realizing, even though I've been teaching negotiation for decades, I and my colleagues, and I know quite a few faculty and have friends in this space, we are making a mistake by starting our negotiation classes about the importance of preparation. Don't get me wrong, preparation is critical. But preparation, right? What do you prepare? How do you prepare? What data do you look for, etc.? Preparation assumes that you've already decided to negotiate, or perhaps someone has decided for you. What if we take a couple of steps back and look at whether we recognize opportunities that come our way? And as I mentioned earlier, and if so, by choosing to engage in at least some of these simple, everyday, low-stakes opportunities, we can get better and be more confident and more competent when the big ones come. So let me model. This is what I call capitalizing, benefiting from engaging in everyday negotiation opportunities. And so this model I'm going to walk you through takes you 2 steps behind preparation. The other concepts, engage and reflect, this is really the bigger focus of our time together. So let me spend a little bit extra time, if you will, on these first 2. So what do I mean by recognize? Well, in the case of the cable bill, you might say to yourself, wow, you mean they've been charging me 15% more on my bill for the last 3 months and I didn't notice this? Is that fair? That sounds, again, maybe like low stakes, but there are other things like this. How about the pandemic? How many of us, when we started working from home, found ourselves doing more housework, more childcare, more elder care, because of the virus and because of our inability and the potential risk of having other caregivers involved? Many of us, in addition to seeing our work hours increase, and the latest research suggests that work from home resulted in 6 hours on average more per week we were working, added to that all of this extra time. Now, is that fair? Okay, we didn't necessarily plan for the pandemic, but what about how the allocation of household tasks fell on both parties in a partnership, in a marriage or in a family? Is that fair? And when you recognize this potential inequity, are you also thinking about, what is it that I deserve? Do I deserve more help, more assistance, more support? Do I deserve better or faster internet service? Do I deserve to pay less because of my loyalty? So when I say recognize opportunities, I'll come next to evaluate them and decide whether it's worth engaging. But by recognizing, what I'm saying is, if a better deal, and the word deal you can interpret how you like, but if a better arrangement, a better offer, a better price, a better cable package were offered to me, in other words, if the cable provider read my mind, sent me a note and said, hey, click here and we'll drop your rate by 20% and increase your speed by 50%, would you take it? Of course you would take it. How often do people read your mind? Exactly. So this is what I mean by recognizing opportunities. Now, this question, I think, again, is kind of ridiculous, but it leads me to ask you the next more serious question. And that's, would a more confident version of me make this request? In other words, were you to recognize the situation as being not fair, not equitable, not deserving, considering your inputs or investments, what would it take for you to want to address this? And if you wanted this to happen, but somehow lacked the confidence or the comfort to be able to make this request, that's one of the things that we're going to be working on in this class. So I hope, to a degree, that this question made some of you squirm a little bit. And I say that because, again, this is an example of moving just outside the comfort zone into the learning zone. How do I become more confident? How do I take that confidence and translate it into being a more assertive and comfortable negotiator? Another way of recognizing a situation that may lend itself to negotiation is something that doesn't necessarily stack up in terms of dollars or speed or allocation of efforts, but is there something that I've recognized that just kind of makes me uneasy, right? There's this pit in my stomach. I can't put my finger on it, but am I in a situation that feels odd? And this might be in the workplace, right? I've been doing excellent work, bringing in new clients, raising our profile, and I haven't gotten a raise in 2 years. Is this fair? Do I feel uneasy about the situation? Am I being treated differently than my colleagues? So, as I mentioned, these ideas don't necessarily fall only in monetary examples, right? And so I want you to think more broadly about what is it that you might come up against that both monetary and non-monetary, that is an opportunity to negotiate, even if you hadn't thought about it before, like the neighbor's tree. So once you've recognized that, hey, there really might be an opportunity here, the most obvious first question to ask yourself when evaluating, should I engage in this opportunity that I just recognized? It's a cost-benefit analysis, right? Now, I keep saying not all negotiation is monetary. Well, in fact, it's true. How much would you gain if you engaged financially, but also emotionally, right? Conflicts don't go away. Being angry with someone because of the way they treated you, but saying nothing, doesn't solve the problem, but does help grow resentment in our bodies, right? So how much would I gain if I raised the issue with my coworker who said something unkind or who touched me in a way that I felt was inappropriate or uncomfortable? How much would I gain morally if I stood up to some practices that I thought were questionable in my workplace? You know, people fear for their jobs just by speaking up. That's why we have ombudsmen and we have cases that talk about whistleblowers. But how much would I gain by engaging versus what might I lose if I didn't engage? And here at Seattle U, within the Jesuit tradition, this idea of moral compass is really, really strong. So recognizing that just being clear about what I stand for, what is right, what is moral, what is legal, these are all elements that would likely enter into the equation. And then finally, when we talk about conflicts in relationships with friends and colleagues, the pandemic allocation of chores, how much does not being engaged affect your well-being? And again, we've seen study after study, we've seen the increase of anxiety and depression. I'm not saying that being a good negotiator would change that for everyone, but I do think it would change it for some. Again, we take our habits and patterns with us. And so if we don't feel comfortable, we haven't been in the habit of questioning or asking, is this fair? How can we address this, etc.? We just sort of take it and take it and take it until we burn out. And so that's why, again, taking a couple steps behind preparing for a negotiation to recognizing and evaluating them, I think is so critical. A few other questions that I consider in this stage of evaluation is there anything that I can use to my advantage so that when I'm making this cost-benefit analysis, I can include that in the calculus. So it may be subject matter expertise that I have, someone who is networked in my connections that could be helpful personally or indirectly. I asked this question already: what would I lose or leave on the table if I didn't engage? Again, this is part of this calculation. And then I alluded to this already. What is the impact on the relationship if I didn't engage? Again, I think people often mistakenly believe that just letting things roll off our backs is a sign of, I don't know, resilience and character, and sometimes it is. But if we let these kinds of microaggressions and issues, if we leave them alone, ignore them, they don't go away. And so I'm asking two questions. Is it worth the effort to engage once I have evaluated the situation? And what other indirect factors may still be keeping me from engaging? Is it the fear of getting involved, fear of people judging me to be overbearing or aggressive? Is it my belief of my skill level or how much time and effort it would take? Or again, am I worried that others may talk badly about me or suddenly stop being my friend if I raise these kinds of issues? So again, I don't want to spend a lot of time here because that's really what we'll do in class. Once we do decide to engage in a negotiation, there's a lot that we can do to prepare. And this is an incomplete list, but it begins to help us walk into the negotiation with some clear ideas of what we want, why we want them. You'll recall Fisher and Ury talk about the what as a position and the why as an interest. And uncovering those interests is critical for you in terms of understanding what all the alternatives might be, but it's also important for you to be able to connect with and link with your opponent's interests. So when you discover those interests, either through your research or questions you ask, you have a better pathway forward to finding mutually satisfying solutions. Another element of preparation is to practice. And again, we're going to do that many times in this session together. And by practice, I mean really going out there and doing it, getting feedback, perhaps for a really difficult negotiation or one you expect a lot of pushback, practicing with a loved one or a close, trusted associate. And so that's another element of preparation. Once we're prepared, of course, we're going to have this negotiation. I speak of it as engaging. And yes, we already mentioned this before, engaging only when you're ready, but also it's important to recognize the framing, how we can set the stage to positively influence what's to follow in the ensuing negotiation and conversation. We'll talk more about that later. Engaging is also about not just going on autopilot, but being really mindful of your goals, of their goals, of your wants, of their wants, even being aware of how your body is feeling, recognizing your emotions and theirs. And it's also important to be mindful of the relationship. There are two key elements in any negotiation. One is, what is it that you want? And the other is, what is the relationship with this other person? So we'll talk a lot more about that. And again, this is key in Fisher and Ury's book. It's about being a principled negotiator, and we will definitely talk more about that. Engaging and being mindful and setting the stage is important, but of course, throughout the course of the conversation, how well we listen. Some of us talk about perspective taking, empathy, active listening. It's not just about hearing, but understanding the meaning behind, the intention behind, and not just understanding, right? Oh, I hear you, but here's my idea. No, it's connecting. Oh, so you're saying that delivery date is even more important than price. Let me see how we can connect with that. Let me go back to our manufacturing rep and see what we can do, right? So listening actively, attentively, and also trying to connect with that as opposed to what many of us do. I hear you, but, and we'll talk about that as well. And finally, again, this is an incomplete list, but just the idea of how strategic pauses, or in negotiation parlance, caucuses, can be, especially when emotions are engaged, especially when it feels like you're beating a dead horse. Don't just keep pushing through it and figure, well, he who talks the longest and loudest wins, but rather, how can you use pauses strategically? Hey, you know what, we're pretty hungry. Let's take a lunch break, or I could use some caffeine. Let's take a caffeine break. Or it could just be, all right, we got 2 key issues discussed and decided, but there's still 2 more on the table. What do you say we break for the day and we come back tomorrow? And those pauses can be incredibly helpful. And the last of these 5 elements in the model I presented is reflect. And what do I mean by that? I said earlier that we tend to see our successes as because of what we've done, right? This is the fundamental attribution error. Other people's successes are due to luck. Our failures, well, that's because something external to me happened, and other people's failures must be, right? So that's the fundamental attribution error, and we want to kind of fight that. In order to continue on this journey of being an effective negotiator, it is absolutely essential to get feedback on what you said, what you did, what you didn't say or didn't do. And that feedback can come from others, people who observe the negotiation, or your negotiating opponent, especially in a class situation. But more importantly than all of that is when we can honestly evaluate ourselves. Thinking back, what did we do? What did we say? What impact did that have? How well did I prepare? Could I have prepared more? Could I have seen this curveball coming, right? So really taking the time to think about how I did in order to continue to improve, and look at repeating what's working and tweaking what's not. And this idea of reflecting is not only critical in being a better negotiator in general, it is a key part of how I've structured the class. So some have exams and quizzes and other assignments, and I don't believe in exams or quizzes in a class like this. Instead, one of the elements that I grade is reflection papers, and ones that are truly candid, truly vulnerable, truly able to connect specifics, things you said or did or didn't do, with the concepts, and moving forward and thinking through, gosh, if I could have done this differently, what would I have done? Those papers not only get the best grades, but they result in the greatest learning and improvement. So we'll do a lot of that. So where do we go from here? This class, again, assumes that you're coming in with a lot of skills and a lot of experience, and this is just a step along the journey. And my goal in this class is to take you where you are, but also hold up the mirror, ask you to really challenge your beliefs, your long-held and perhaps unchallenged beliefs about what success in negotiation does and doesn't look like. It's not just about getting more. and winning. Challenge your beliefs about what you deserve and what you could ask for. And that goes back to the recognize and evaluate. Challenging your beliefs about what is and isn't negotiable. And maybe some of you already do a lot of prep before a big negotiation. Maybe you don't. So I'm going to hopefully challenge your beliefs about how critical that preparation and practice is. And we'll do this, as I said, in a lot of reflections, hands-on activities, debates, discussions, and generally doing. So we'll have different kinds of scenarios in different contexts with different parties and numbers of parties and size of parties. And we'll also have negotiations that you do in person and those that are virtual. Last but not least, one thing you should expect and start thinking about now is that one of your assignments in this class is not a simulation. It's real. And by that I mean every one of you has the requirement of determining a negotiation that you will engage in sometime during this term. You will prepare for this negotiation, have this negotiation, and then your paper is primarily a reflection, kind of as I've been talking about. And so start thinking about this now. This should be a negotiation of some importance. Now, it doesn't have to be buying a house or buying a company, but it should be more than negotiating with your partner whether you go to the movies Friday night or Saturday night. So start thinking about what would be an appropriate project for you to undertake for this class. It could be professional in the workplace, it could be personal, it could involve volunteer work that you might do. And yes, this negotiation has to occur within the term. The one thing that I will say, to put some of your minds at ease, I am not grading you on how you do. I'm not grading you on your success. I am, however, going to be grading you on how thoughtfully, how candidly, how thoroughly, how analytically you can take apart, unpack what happened and understand and learn from why things didn't go as well as they should have and what did go well so that you can repeat this. Well, thanks for listening. I can't wait to see you all in person. Have a great few days before we meet.